Hi again, everybody. This is part 2 of my message to all the members of the Reflections on the Dance page. I left off saying that the creation process of Reflections on the Dance was a very, very spiritual process. And, sometimes when I mention that, people think that's pretty strange. I've had people say, well, what does Michael Jackson have to do with God? And why would you have a spiritual experience creating a website about Michael Jackson? And I realize that, and to some people it does sound strange, but it's the truth. I experienced many unusual things during that time. As I said, it took me about 3.5 months to create Reflections, and it launched on October 13th, 2009, and it was just, it was hard to explain. The whole process was hard to explain. I liken it to a woman who is in labor, and there's a sense of the labor pains come and go until the woman gives birth. And this was much the same in the way that I would have different, very strong, overwhelming feelings. There were several times where I thought, okay, site's ready to go. I'm gonna launch it, and it was not ready to go, and I would suddenly get these very strong feelings. I would be almost like overwhelmed with emotion. Everything regarding Michael would be affecting me very deeply, and I would realize, no, I learned to accept and realize that this was a sign that there's more coming. And every single time that happened, more information came. People all of a sudden were just, it was like things fell into my lap. All of a sudden I would be hooked up with different people that knew him, or I would get information, or I would research and find something out that needed to go on the site. And I do believe that what is on that site is what God wanted to be on that site. And I believe that He wants to vindicate his child, one of His children. And as many of you know, Michael was a spiritual person. He said it himself many times. And everything that he stood for and everything that he did was guided by that faith. And it's funny because every person that has met him in person, or whether it was a handshake or a hug, or someone touching him touching someone's face, or just a meeting with him, being able to meet him backstage or at a record signing, or everybody said that it was as if, people likened it to being in the presence of God. And again, I am not stating that Michael was God or Michael was Jesus. I do not believe that. But a better description would be how some have said that there was almost like an aura around him of love, and almost as if you could see that the love of God was in his heart, and when you were around him, it just oozed out of him. And that's something I've heard from every single person that I've spoken with who knew him, or who's ever met him. So there's something there. There's a reason, and I tend to believe that Michael was sent here for some reason. He was sent here, with a message. Maybe we're supposed to learn something through all of this. When you just look at the amount of ridicule and the horrible things he had to go through, that alone, there's a lesson there. I don't believe that was just for naught. I believe that there's some reason why that happened. And so if you go from where you're saying, well, this doesn't make sense, why would this be a spiritual experience? all I can say is that it was, and I felt very strongly the presence of God when I was creating the site. And that was sort of a new experience for me. I've always been a person of faith, but this was a whole different level. It was overwhelming, it was powerful, but I wasn't scared. It wasn't a fearful feeling. It was a feeling of peace, but a feeling of knowing that God was with me in this. And one thing is that, when God involves himself in things, it's always confirmed. There's always confirmations. And one of the things that's really stood out to me is that a lot of people who visit the site have said to me, there's a peace on that site. There's comfort. They sense something. Some people say they sense God. Some people say they sense Michael. Some people have just said they can't put their finger on it. And it's, that's God. That's because I believe this is his project. I was just the instrument that it came through, and God can use any of us. It doesn't make me any different than anyone else. And for whatever reason that I was allowed to do this, I'm grateful, and I feel very blessed that I've been able to do this. But so many things like that. Just being able to meet different people that knew Michael, that were close with him, and these things just happened. It wasn't, I didn't, being at the right place at the right time, the right, everything just fell into place. And one of the things that really was a confirmation to me was in speaking with people who were close with Michael when they first saw the site. They confirmed to me that this was a very accurate portrayal and description of who Michael really was. And these were people who knew him for 10 years or more, up until the time that he passed. And I remember thinking, how can that be? I've never met him, I've never spoken with him. And obviously I'd watched the videos of his interviews and things of that nature, and you can get a very good feel for who he was through that. But it amazed me that it was as accurate as they said it was, and that it was all truth. So that was another confirmation to me. And just different experiences I had. I've explained a little bit about an experience that I had one evening. I had been working on the site all day, and it was a particularly rough day, and I was paging through Dancing the Dream. I spent a lot of time looking through that book, because reading his poetry and looking at the pictures really gave me a clearer view of who he was. His essence is in there because it's what he wrote, it's what he felt, just like reading his lyrics or listening to his music. And I think that that particular evening I was very frustrated, and I was looking at a specific picture in that book, and I just remember kind of saying, out loud just to myself, please, Michael, show me who you are. I wanted confirmation. I was finding so much garbage back and forth, and sometimes it is hard to decipher the truth from fiction when there's so much fiction out there on Michael. And so one of the things, I looked at this picture, and I realized that it was just such a sad picture. And the more that I looked, the more I realized something grabbed me from that picture. And I looked at it, and it was, the only way I can describe it is to say that I felt that I was somehow being allowed to feel all of the emotions that Michael went through. sort of all just coming at you like a rushing train, like a semi. And it was the most powerful thing I've ever felt in my life. I was just shaking and crying when I experienced it, because I had never felt anything like that in my life before. It was betrayal, sadness, hurt, pain. Those were the emotions that were coming at me, and it was very, very powerful. And I had other unusual experiences during the process of the creation of the site, and I can only think that those were allowed so that I could accurately portray what he went through, and who he really was. Because having not known him, that would have not been very possible normally. So to have that confirmation was pretty important to me, to have that come back at me, and have people that knew him confirm, that this was accurate. And I'm sorry I can't remember what I've said and what I haven't said, but one thing that I realized is that every time that God does something, he confirms it. And hearing back from people that knew him that have said this to me was a confirmation. The emails and the guest book entries and other people I hear from who have, some have found God, some have gone back to God, some were haters previously who, after seeing the site and seeing the truth about who Michael really was versus what the media said, realized how wrong they were and have written me about that. So again, that to me was a confirmation that there was something there, that God was confirming his work. And I just want to peek at my notes here. I know I'm going to have to go into another session here. I think that, and I think I've already stated that people felt God's light coming through Michael. And, I think that's where things tie in, that there was something special about him. He was a human being. He was not divine. I'm not stating that, but there was something there that was special, and that's why we're all mourning him. That's why we still are mourning him, over a year and a half later after his passing. And some of the other things I want to go into are I wanted to cover about the Ustream and about the autopsy a little bit, and give you some preview of that. And also kind of the reason I'm bringing all this past stuff up about how the website came into being is that during that time I had very, very strong feelings about different things, and I still do. And one of the things that I really have been feeling lately is that, and that's why I shared that picture, was that God is going to vindicate Michael. I feel it. I feel it in my spirit. I feel it in my gut. And I had those feelings, similar feelings to when I created the site. And so I've learned to trust those feelings. And that's one of the things that I wanted to share, because I want everyone to feel, to not worry as much, to not stress out as much about what's going on, because God is always in control. He's been in control from the beginning, and he's still in control. He vindicated Michael in 2005. And though we all wish that Michael were still here, he's not, and there is a reason for that, though we might not realize what that is. I'm going to cut off now, and we'll continue on in a third part, and hopefully that'll be, hopefully I won't go past the third part. All right, thanks for listening, everybody.